tonight our first keynote speaker is Mike Hudack of Blip TV. And Mike, we have to say, he is a hero because he actually has the flu. So he won't sneeze on anyone, but has a flu. So Mike from Blip TV, everybody.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So I'm mostly feeling better, but two notes. One is that I'm hopped up on cold medicine and I had a beer. So if I get loopy, I apologize. And then my ears are kind of like, they're kind of a little bit screwed up, so if I fall over, that's why. It could also be the beer. So I was talking to people earlier and kind of asking what to talk about and about lessons learned and all this kind of stuff. And I was told to tell stories, to tell anecdotes about starting the company, about starting Blip, and kind of what our experience was like. And before I do that, I'll give you just a tiny little bit about Blip and what we do. And then I want to tell you a story about how we raised our first round of funding. Blip is, we're building what we call the next generation television network, literally looking at what TV networks are today and saying, if they weren't started in 1939, which NBC debuted at the 1939 World's Fair, what would they look like if they started in 2005? And so everything we do is around that central question, and what it ends up with is that there are a ton of people out there who are making web shows, TV shows on the web, sitcoms, news magazines, how-to shows, dramas, kind of you name it. They're very good at making the content, but they need help with just about everything else. So we give them that support, we distribute them across the web, we sell advertising against them, and then we share that money back with the producers and literally help them make a living. We have shows on Blip now that are making $500,000 or more a year from the advertising revenue share, and we're doing about 140 million video views a month, reaching about 30 million people. So that is kind of like the snapshot. We started the business in May of 2005, and when we started, there were only two web shows. There's a show called Rocket Boom, and there was a show called Tiki Bar TV. And we were really, really excited. We looked at that and said, this is going to be the next stage after blogging. Blogging has been really big. We didn't have an opportunity to be on the ground floor there. We really want to be involved in this and on the ground floor. So we took some software that we had been building as a knowledge management platform. We stripped out all the features. We added video support, and we launched the first version of Blip literally that weekend. And we found a mailing list with a few hundred people on it who were interested in this space, and we announced it on that list. And we were expecting to get, frankly, a few hundred users. We ended up getting two. This guy, Shlomo Rabinowitz in San Francisco, great guy, owns a bar out there called the House of Shields, you should go visit, and this woman, Pepa, in Spain. And they were great people, but two was very different than a few hundred. So we had this crisis meeting, and we paced around. I remember pacing around my apartment. I had a little tiny studio on the Upper East Side. And I remember pacing around for about an hour and a half on the phone with the other founders saying, basically, we thought we knew what these people needed, but we were totally wrong. And do we keep going, or do we just cut our losses? And what we ended up doing was finding 4 or 5 people who were incredibly influential in the community, who were leaders of the community, the guy who started that mailing list, the guys who started Rocket Boom, and so on and so forth. And we took them out for dinner and drinks for about a month and said, we thought we knew what we were doing, but we were clearly wrong. What should we do? And it took us a little while, honestly, to earn their trust. And once we did, the litany of things that came out of them was unbelievable, of feature requests, oh, please stop doing this way, do it that way, please support Creative Commons, change your terms of service, all sorts of stuff. And so what we did was we spent the next 2 months or so rebuilding the entire product and putting all of their feature requests in there. And then we went to a barbecue on a roof in New Jersey to an event called VloggerQ. And there were probably about, I'd say, 60 people at VloggerQ. It was networked to a bunch of other barbecues around the world. And I had the most amazing Cambodian barbecue I've ever had in my life that was made on the roof of this warehouse out in Jersey. Drank a ton of Corona, more than I can handle with the cold medicine, I'm afraid. And then when the sun went downstairs and gave a demo. And we picked up 300 or 400 users that night, simply because we had listened to our users. We hadn't given up when we didn't get any users. We listened to them. And we built what they asked for. And then based on the feedback that they gave us, we built more. We realized, for example, that it took people at the time about an entire day to get every new episode of their show online and get it to all the places they wanted it to go. iTunes didn't have podcasting yet, but there were 3 or 4 different software packages that did that. To get it to all those places, to get it to, I shouldn't walk over there, to get it to their blog, it took a day. And so we built a bunch of features that took that day-long agony, really, and took it down to about half an hour. And that's how we got all those users. And so we did this nights and weekends for about a year. I was working as a software developer and system administrator at the National Hockey League. We did this nights and weekends for literally a year. And then one day, a friend of mine called me up and just chewed me out. And he spent about half an hour screaming at me on the phone. And at this point, we already had some traction. We had a fair number of users. We were starting to get some traffic. And he just told me, like, you will never build a business doing this part-time. It simply won't happen. You can't do it. And so he kind of convinced me to quit my job on the strength of $25,000 in friends and family money. And then we had about 3 months to raise $500,000 because we had bandwidth bills to pay, had to pay my salary, had to pay other people's salary. We didn't have any money. We didn't know what we were doing. And we had 3 months to raise $500,000. And so we got some introductions from this guy. And we got this one guy, Steven. Somehow we convinced him to write a $50,000 personal check after I met him over dinner, and literally just told him about the vision, told him about what we wanted to do. And at the end of the dinner, he takes out his checkbook and he writes a $50,000 check. And it was literally the largest check I had ever seen in my life. So I called everybody up and said, holy shit, we just got a check. And we all went out to this bar in Brooklyn and we put the check in the middle of the table and we got absolutely pissed. I mean, ridiculous. It's amazing that we didn't leave the check on the table there. And then we took that, and with the strength of that one $50,000 investment, we went to a bunch of other people we'd been talking to and said, look, somebody has written us a check. You should too. And we got somebody else to write a $100,000 check. And by the end of about a month and a half, 2 months, we had a lot of money, but we had about a $200,000 hole in the middle of our round, and we couldn't close the round without that. And we'd been talking to this guy for a while about writing a $200,000 check, and I met with him I must have met with him 20 times. And he was like our one hope for actually closing this round. We were doing what's called a rolling round, so you don't have a lead, but you're just kind of like collecting checks until you have all the money. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in his apartment, it's this beautiful penthouse on Central Park West, decorated with like Persian art and what looked like a $35,000 couch. And we're sitting there, and he's leafing through our financial projections, which are like 30 pages of Excel documents saying, you know, what kind of revenue we'd be doing 4 or 5 years down the road. And he looks me right in the eye, and he says, where did you get these numbers? And I looked back at him, and I thought for about a minute. I didn't say a word. You could hear a pin drop in the room. And I ended up saying that I got the numbers from the same place he got his numbers when he started his company. And he looked at me and didn't say anything for about a minute, and then he smiled, and he said, okay. But that wasn't quite enough. I had to meet him a few more times. And then finally I met him at his office, spent another like 2 hours with him, talked about the business, talked about all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the meeting, he still hadn't committed. It was probably like our 25th meeting at this point. And we both had to go to the bathroom at the end of the meeting. And so we left his office and went to the urinals, and he looks over the divider at me. And he says, are you really serious about this? And I wasn't quite sure what he was asking about. And I said, yes, I am. And he said, okay. And so we shook, we washed our hands, and then we shook again. Sorry about that. And he wired the money the next week. And what he told me at the time was that the reason why he finally decided to invest, no bullshit, was because I had a good handshake. And he said that he had an opportunity to invest in another company where the CEO had actually just sold for a fairly good amount of money, $40, $50 million or something. And he didn't do it because the guy had a bad handshake. Wouldn't look him in the eye when he shook his hand. And it's these things, when you're first raising money, that actually matter. Because every business changes. Every business is really about execution. The idea is ultimately worthless. There are 1 million people with the same idea out there. You know, there are probably a couple hundred group buying sites out there, but it's Groupon that has managed to execute incredibly well and turn down a $6 billion offer. It's all about how you execute day to day. And I think as the CEO, you have a couple of jobs. It's a super simple job when you really look at it, because you don't actually do anything all day. I don't do anything, like, at this point. Instead, my first job is to have a vision, to have a really, really clear vision, and to articulate that clearly to every investor, to every stakeholder, to the press, and to everybody who works at the company. Because they all have to believe. Everybody has to believe. You have to believe, and they have to believe, because everything is a roller coaster. You know, startup life, raising that money, when you got that first $50,000 check, that was an incredible feeling. I felt like we were at the top of the world, but then when we couldn't raise the other 200, you're at the bottom of the world. And the only thing that brings you through that is the vision and the belief in the vision, keeping you going day to day after day to day. Your second job is to capitalize the company and keep it capitalized. Make sure that you never run out of money. And your third job is to surround yourself with people who are better than you are, because you can't do everything. And you need to surround yourself with people who are better and smarter and harder working than you are. And you have to make sure that they know the vision, that they believe in the vision, and that they have enough money to pay their bills while they're executing against the vision. And that's what it is at the end of the day. So I told a couple stories. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm in the same round of raising money. What should I expect to lose for raising like 50,000 or 200K?
So you're raising money here. I'll
Yes.
take that back. So you're raising money. You want to raise $50,000, and you want to know what are the company you have to give up for that. Well, first point is you probably shouldn't be raising $50,000. I don't know how far you think $50,000 is going to go, but I'll tell you my own experience is no matter how much money we've raised, our first round was $500,000, and then we raised a few million. Our latest round was $10 million, and every single time I've raised money, you look at the bank account when the money comes in, and you're like, holy shit, I don't know how I can spend this. And then 6 months later, you're like, oh, I have absolutely no problem spending this, right? So I would take the amount of money that you think you need and double or triple it. That's the first thing. The other problem is that when investors come in, they have benchmarks for how much of the company they want to own, because they're taking a risk. And writing you a $50,000 check versus a $100,000 check is actually less important than the amount of time that they spend with you, the opportunity cost that you represent. And so you could ask for $100,000 and probably end up giving up a very similar percentage of the company as $50,000. Now, the traditional old saw for venture capital investing, I think, is that they want 15 to maybe 30% of the company. And it depends quite a bit based on how much you're raising, how much risk you represent, everything else. When you're just raising that first 50 or 100 or $250,000, you should do it as what's called a convertible note, which means that you're not actually putting a value on the company. So you're taking it in as debt and then converting it to equity at the value that's established in the next round. Because basically every time you raise money, what you're doing is you're saying, with this $100,000 or $500,000 or $50,000, I'm going to get from point A to point B. And at point B, the company is going to be worth much more than at point A. Very early on, you have no idea what the company is going to be worth at point B. You just don't have any metrics. You look at your financial model, and they came from outer space, right? It's nonsense, it's garbage, and everybody who invests is going to know that. So say at $50,000, it's a $50,000 debt that will get tacked onto your next round at a 20% discount. In other words, they get 120% of what they otherwise would have gotten if they invested in that next round. Make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Come on, really? Somebody's got to have a question. Do you want me to tell another story about bathrooms or something? I can if you want. Yeah. I don't think I have any other bathroom stories. Yes, sir.
In your initial round, did you just go to friends and family? And when you went to friends and family, how did you feel when someone, a real close friend of yours, actually gave you money and trusted you to make them money? How did you feel?
Well, we didn't entirely go friends and family. So the first check that we got was from one of my co-founders' parents. And so that was certainly momentous. I think, really when we raise money, the amazing feeling that you get, I think most people think that when you raise money, it's a cause for celebration and you're like, oh God, I have all this money. And now the reality is that the way that I felt every time that we raised a round was, holy shit, we have to build that much of a bigger company now. Because every time you raise money, it puts a new price on you. And by the time you get up to raising like $10 million or something like that, you can't sell for a small amount of money. You have to sell the company for a lot of money, otherwise nobody really wins. So every time I've raised money, the feeling that I've felt is just this kind of incredible pressure to build the next step. And maybe you go out and we actually have a tradition that we don't really celebrate. We have 40 people at the company now. And if we were to raise a round right now, we would get 2 bottles of champagne. Everybody gets about this much, and then everybody goes back to work. And that's the way we've always done it. And nothing more than that, because you just took on a huge chunk of additional responsibility. And that's the reality. Please.
What about the first check? Sorry, I was just, it's just a comment. What about the first check?
The first check, we celebrated like hell. Yeah, absolutely. No question. Yeah, just speak up.
Okay. Can you let everyone know about your initial startup team, who the players were, what their roles were?
Yeah, the question is about the initial team. So we started the company with 5 people, 5 co-founders, which everybody advised us not to do. We'd all known each other for a long time. And actually, when we were raising money, we had people tell us that they would not invest in a team with 5 co-founders. And that we had to get rid of people, because the reality was, their view was that we would end up getting rid of people at some point, and they didn't want to be throwing equity at the people that weren't going to be there in a long time. It's, God, 4.5 years later, and everybody still works at the company. Everybody has found their role. And initially it was myself. I was a software developer, just like a coder. In fact, we were 4 coders and a reporter. And we made it work, and everybody had their specialty, and everybody kind of, over time, found their place. And, one of them has become our CTO. One of them took on an operating role for a really long time and now has moved into a marketing role. But over time, what you realize is that everybody's individual contribution declines over time. So early on, we could not have started the company without all 5 people. But now, hopefully, if I left the company would still go. Like, that's part of my job, right, is to make myself obsolete. So in the early days, you need a team that you trust implicitly, who always has your back and you always have their back, and you're just, some of those days, you really do. You pull all-nighters, and you really have to trust people, and you really have to work well with people. But then the company grows, and that's the reality. But we could not have gotten to this point, and we're not successful yet. We're not there yet. But we could not have gotten to this point without every single one of those people. And I am incredibly proud of the fact that everybody is still at the company. But it is a risk. And so what you want to do is you want to balance out your founding team and really have those people that you trust implicitly, who you really respect, who you can really count on. But you also don't want too many. We were at the border, and honestly, I don't know of any other 5-person founding teams that have survived. It's a really, really, really hard thing to do. One more, last one.
Going back to what you were saying about convertible debt, I can imagine that a lot of potential investors might balk at the idea of giving you money without getting tangible equity. I guess I'm wondering more, is that something that more seasoned investors are familiar with and respect and are enthusiastic about? Or do you just have to work twice as hard to convince them to go for it?
No, I think that actually convertible debt is preferred by a lot of early stage investors as well. And the reason is because if you're an investor in a company that's just a couple of people and an idea and a prototype, you really have no idea how to value it either. And more likely than not, the entrepreneur is going to come to you and come out with some crazy number for how much the company's worth. Like, oh, the company's worth $10 million or $20 million. The reality is that before the money's put in, it's probably worth close to zero, right? So it's actually in the investor's best interest as well, because you're fighting against too low a price, where they're going to really try to lowball you, and they're fighting against too high a price, where you're going to really try to highball them. And so convertible debt really allows you to say, we're going to spend a year, we're going to spend 6 months, we're going to execute, and then we're going to be able to put a real value on the company. And often convertible debt for more seasoned investors will have a cap on it. So if your next round of funding is at a valuation, say, above $5 million, then the investors in your seed round actually get it at, they actually get to invest at the $5 million valuation instead of, say, a $10 million valuation. Thank you very much, guys. I think oh, one more question.
So Vinod Khosla talks about vision as bumbling around. And entrepreneurship is a lot about failures. So can you share with us your biggest failure?
Oh, wow. My biggest failure. My father used to tell me that success is always one more failure away. That was like his favorite saying. And it's very true. I mean, I don't know that I have a single biggest failure, but I can say that I've failed way more times than I've succeeded. I don't think I've succeeded yet as an entrepreneur. Like, to be clear, having a 40-person company, getting real revenue, getting advertisers, like, it feels really good, but it's not success yet. It's not even close to success. And the bar on success always moves up. Like, I would have considered this success 2 years ago, and now I think there's just so much more to do. We started, so first company I tried to start was a computer security and privacy company where we made PGP really easy to use for law firms. And it was born out of my experience at the first company I worked at, where I was working on patent applications and the attorneys would not email with me. They had to FedEx everything back and forth. And so I said, all right, we're going to build something so encryption becomes really easy to use for lawyers. Nobody wanted it. They got comfortable with regular email by the time we were done building it. We tried to build something we called Dashboard at one point, which was a customizable homepage where you would come in your browser and you could like clip pieces of web pages and put them in. It was kind of like the next generation My Yahoo. We did this at a time when everybody was using Netscape 4.7.2 and it didn't work very well. Another one which was a lot of fun, which actually illustrates a really important point, was we started a company called Blogfoot, which when camera feature phones first came out, you could take a photo with your phone and send it into Blogfoot, and we would automatically post it to your blog for you. It was great, and we got a ton of users really fast, and then Flickr came out with that feature. And so I learned the hard way the difference between a feature, a product, and a business. But there are many more, absolutely. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Mike.